So let's get into the first question. Historically, the U.S.-Israel tech relationship, or the U.S.-Israel relationship in general, has been predicated on the conversation of security and defense cooperation. Just generally speaking, how the United States can help keep Israel safe and secure in such a hostile environment that Israel is living in. But Israel has emerged over the past few decades as a global leader in technology, and the relationship has really deepened significantly to become much more of a two-way street. So broad picture first, since we'll get into the nuances of it a little bit later, I'd love to hear from the both of you about how the U.S.-Israel tech relationship has grown over the past few years, especially as Israel has showcased its dominance as a leader in the tech industry. Let's start off with you first, Aaron.
Sure. Yeah, so I think actually a big piece of the growth between the U.S. and Israel on the tech side has actually emerged from the defense cooperation that you just mentioned. And I think one of the points to illustrate this is you just need to look at Iron Dome as an example. I think by now everyone on this call knows what Iron Dome is, but it's the anti-missile defense system that Israel set up against short-range missiles. Iron Dome is American funded and Israeli pioneered, and the benefits we're seeing from this just keep driving more innovation. So I'll just go over it very quickly. Basically, Iron Dome saves lives. It saves money from infrastructure damage. The U.S. has invested a lot of money. AIPAC has put a lot of work into supporting this as a U.S. and Israeli interest. And we know the immediate benefits to Israeli citizens of obviously being protected from missile attacks. What happened last year is the U.S. acquired two Iron Dome, the U.S. military acquired two Iron Dome batteries. So now you're seeing the tech relationship continuing and expanding. But what's most interesting to me is when I worked for Governor Cuomo at New York State, there's a small startup called Emprest, which is based in Petah Tikva, which basically designed the brains behind Iron Dome. So the whole operating system was built by this small company, and as Iron Dome grew, this company was able to grow. And when I was with the state, they signed a partnership with the New York Power Authority to see if the technology that basically coordinates all the systems and integrates everything properly could be used to reduce energy costs, to predict outages. So New York Power Authority integrated it into two power stations in New York. The pilot went successfully, and now Empress, the small startup in Petah Tikva that basically was founded to stop missiles, is now in all 80 state power stations in New York State. And even more so, it gets even better, because when my organization met with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who we could have another conversation about the politics later, but the thing that most interested her team, was that one of these power stations was in her district. And when we spoke about this, they perked up and wanted to know more. Why is this Israeli technology saving money for my taxpayers, and why is it bringing clean energy? Like, let's learn more about this. So I think that what's come out of this defense relationship, you can start seeing just the technology growing and growing and growing to the point where, and Andrew can speak also to this, it also has gotten to the political level.
Sure. Well, just to follow on that, I think a few points, just as reference to everyone who's watching. And I know that, Yael, there's an audience, across the U.S. So Aaron and I have a very East Coast, specifically Northeast, I think, eye on this. But, I also want to make this relevant to friends who may be on the West Coast or other parts of the country who are watching. One of the things also important is my office is unique. We're New Jersey is the only state in the U.S. that has a full-bodied office, statewide office exclusive to Israel relations. And we'll talk more about that history later, perhaps. But New Jersey is a little bit unique. I know that Aaron also worked on these issues from a statewide perspective when he was with Governor Cuomo, and Governor Murphy in New Jersey has really put a huge amount of emphasis. And I think that emphasis ties into what Aaron was saying to your question, which is I'm noticing a huge transition from these sort of big projects, these big initiatives like Iron Dome or infrastructure security, where the U.S. and Israel had a huge amount of tech cooperation, to a migration where Israeli technology is hitting Main Street. And what I'm trying to do in New Jersey, and I think a lot of states are replicating, is asking the question, how do we get Israeli innovation and technology into the hands or accessible to small or medium-sized companies in states across America? How do we make it easier for our businesses to take advantage of the technology or do business with companies in Israel and create and innovate together? And so what I'm trying to do, at least in the state of New Jersey, is to empower our companies, to open doors for them, to build bridges so that, if you're everything from a, electronics manufacturer, or you work in the energy space, or you, I don't know, you have a small or light manufacturing, whatever it is, we want you to have an Israeli partner and to be able to integrate their technology into what you're doing. And so we've done that in two ways. First, Aaron alluded to this really exciting opportunity that was done in New York State with Empress. And what we've done in New Jersey is actually, since I started last summer, is really recommitted ourselves to the relationship with the Bird Foundation. And I would hope that everyone who's watching this program knows about Bird. It's an incredibly exciting program. It's a binational fund between the U.S. and Israel. It has money that comes in from the federal government, particularly their energy program. And what we do through this program, and something that I've been really pushing, and we actually had a program just over a week ago. We had New Jersey food manufacturers. We have an amazing food manufacturing industry in our state. We were able to get a whole bunch of those companies to join a program to learn how they can actually get grant money. They can apply for up to $1 million. So, if you're making canned foods or meat or whatever it is, you can get up to $1 million to do R&D with an Israeli company. And for us, this is an absolutely incredible way to take advantage of these dollars, particularly in a post-COVID-19 environment where money is tight right now. Inject that into our industries in New Jersey. And by the way, states all across the country are doing this. So that's been a tremendously helpful way to drive more innovation into our state. The other thing we've done, and I think Aaron can also speak to some of this through New York, we had a great deal that we did with the Israel Innovation Authority. So what we want to do is do more agreements with Israel, to the Israel Innovation Authority, and let those technologies, let those opportunities to get grant money trickle down to our Main Street businesses, and let those guys take advantage of opportunities with Israel.
Yeah, and Yael, if I could just add one more thing. You're speaking about how this relationship has grown on the large scale level. What I think we're seeing in recent years is a major spike in U.S. companies who are setting up in Israel. So Andrew and I both focused on the inbound, but there's also a lot of outbound going on. Just this week, you had Warner Music announce that it's opening a presence in Israel. MasterCard opened a new initiative in southern Israel earlier this year that it was announced. You even have Ford, which, knowing its history with Henry Ford, one of the most notorious anti-Semites in U.S. history, Ford has an R&D center now in Tel Aviv. So companies know that if they want to compete, they need to acquire and have a presence and boots on the ground in Israel.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually a few days ago, I was re-listening to this podcast with David Markowski and Dan Senor and Ambassador Shapiro, and the whole conversation was just sort of predicated on that it's not just tech companies that are setting up shop in Israel, but other companies aside from tech, like the automotive industry, is setting up shop in Israel, and a lot of Israeli entrepreneurs, and even younger than that as well, like teenagers in high school, are developing technologies because they know that they can be acquired at such a high rate and high level. Andrew, you touched on a really sort of interesting point about how Israeli tech companies are also setting up shop here in the United States as well. It's much more of a two-way street. And Aaron, you had released a study as part of your work with the New York Israel Business Alliance, which stated that Israeli-linked companies in New York State generated around $18.6 billion in revenue in 2018, directly employed around 24,000 people in the state. Massachusetts also did a very similar study that found that around nearly 4% of the state's GDP came directly from Israel. These are really remarkable data points, especially given the fact that the Israeli population comparative to the whole global population is around 0.01%. So Israel is clearly making an impact. I'd love to hear from the both of you just a little bit about how state and local government has helped foster this form of significant growth and collaboration across the U.S. Whoever wants to start first.
Yeah,
Andrew.
I'll jump in first. Look, it's very impressive. These are impressive numbers for sure. In New Jersey, we don't have the exact same trade or the exact same statistics or study that Aaron did in New York. What we do know, just as an example, New Jersey has about a $1.3 billion trade relationship with Israel, meaning inbound and outbound goods valued at about $1.3 billion. And we'd like to actually see that number increase, obviously, as we go forward. I think that one of the ways in which we've brought that number up is actually through a lot of personal and I think personal and aggressive action by our governor, Phil Murphy, when he came in. Went to Israel, was his first foreign trip. He also visited Germany in that trip, two technology powerhouse nations. And, Governor Murphy was extremely committed to going to Israel and bringing back opportunity. So, we also know, just as an example, and I think every state is, I see every state so hungry for the Israel relationship. And that's what's so exciting. I'm out here competing to bring in companies from Israel with other states, New York, Texas, California, even far away places like, for us, Arizona, they're all competing with us. So we have to put up a very strong game here in New Jersey to make our state competitive. And we look at Israel as having some of the best and brightest minds with obviously some of the best technology. We want that here. And that's why Governor Murphy went to Israel. That's why I went there in February with a trade mission. And what we also see is that, again, as you mentioned, and Aaron mentioned, it's a two-way street. So I believe that we are now, New Jersey, for example, we're number 5 in outbound investment and foreign direct investment to Israel. So, and I've got companies who have approached me from very diverse industries who are now looking to set up shop in Israel as well. So, I think the key to this is leadership, from the top. Our governor, our head of our economic development authority in our state, we have a state sort of a semi standalone nonprofit that promotes New Jersey out of New Jersey. All of these people, including many legislators, have gotten on board with this, see the potential, and have gone right to Israel, right to the leadership, including, by the way, and we could talk about this, the universities, which are so important. New York has got the Technion, that's built on Roosevelt Island. In New Jersey, we're looking at many opportunities to attract R&D and scientific talent from Israeli academia. This is all able to be commercialized and is extremely valuable. So we're out there aggressively recruiting these companies, and I know that in New York, to Aaron, they've also been doing that. Yeah,
and I think. Yael, you mentioned the report. Basically, the New York Israel Economic Impact Report was this idea that I know, walking around the streets of New York City, going up to Long Island, I know that there's an Israeli presence. I feel it, I see it, I hear Hebrew on the streets. We wanted to quantify it. We wanted to actually see, well, how many Israelis, what's happening here? Because having worked for a state government, you can understand that the governor's priorities is number 1, 2, and 3, right behind safety and health, is jobs, jobs, jobs. So if we can show that Israeli companies are creating jobs, my thoughts on this were we can actually reframe how we think about Israel. So I wanted this report to show that Israel is a local job creator. And you mentioned some of the statistics. Israeli-founded companies employed 24,850 New Yorkers, generated $8.6 billion of revenue in 2018. All of this is great stuff. And now we had a baseline from which we could say, okay, now how do we grow? How do we take 506 Israeli-founded companies to 700? And what really this is a tool for elected officials to put resources into attracting Israeli companies, to sending local companies to Israel. And Andrew touched on this. I'm a firm believer that once you get a governor to set foot in Israel, you've built a relationship for who knows how long. And governors, have a very good shot of running for president. There's a real investment here of just getting them on the ground, because then you have someone who's hooked for life once they see what's happening in the tech ecosystem with the vibrancy, the food, the music, everything is great. Just get them there.
I want to add just one important thing to what Aaron said, which is that, this is my philosophy here, that every state, again, I know there's probably people from all over who are watching this, and it's something for them to think about, including if they are if they run their own business, or if they are an executive in a company, or, in technology. Every state has its own competitive advantage. Just like, every country has its own competitive advantages. New Jersey does some things, better than New York, and we don't always want to admit that, but we all have certain industries that are really key to us. And I can go into what's great in New Jersey, and Aaron can talk about what's great in New York and probably many other states. But I think that one of the keys to success in our Israel relationship is that we can't do everything, we can't be everywhere. So we have to choose very carefully where we're going to match up, with. So in our case, our biotech industry in New Jersey is legendary. So we've really tried to focus on the Israeli biotech industry and pair up some of our just incredible pharmaceutical companies with Israeli ones, and that's been very successful for us.
It's really fascinating points here, just sort of about how we're taking governors to Israel for them to see what it's like on the ground and different ways that they can develop strong economic ties with Israel. I'd like to get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty behind how memorandums of understandings are established between states and Israel. So like you had said, Andrew, a lot of states have different competitive advantages and are focused on specific niches or specific sectors. So New Jersey, life sciences; New York, energy; cyber for New York City; Boston as well for cybersecurity. It's very much niched. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how governors are determining the importance of establishing MOUs, whether it be in the lead up to their trip to Israel, or is it after, once they return back from those trips? How are those MOUs are established, and what is the strategic importance behind all of that?
Maybe I think, Aaron, maybe you want to go first, and I'll throw in something.
I think MOUs can be as effective as a tool as they want to be and as people make them. There are a lot of MOUs out there that are just window dressing, but there are some really effective MOUs that some states have negotiated that often, they can happen throughout the year. A lot of times a governor will negotiate ahead of a trip to Israel and announce it during the trip. There's been some really exciting MOUs across the country. I saw Space Florida just announced the winners of its, they have a collaboration with Israeli startups in the space technology sector, and they just announced 4 of their winners earlier this week. Thomas Jefferson University in Pennsylvania, they have an MOU that's been really effective with the Israel Innovation Authority. And I know the Philadelphia Israel Chamber of Commerce was very involved in helping to facilitate that agreement. Even the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota has, they're funding Israeli startups in healthcare. So that was not a governmental MOU. So you could also do it just private sector. What else? You have Hartford Healthcare has an MOU that it signed also with the Israel Innovation Authority. Actually, it happened at the beginning of March. And if you watch the video or look at the photos, they're not shaking hands. They're sort of just touching elbows in this new reality. So these MOUs, the ones I just listed, I think are really effective and can really help catalyze some innovation in technology. A lot of those I mentioned were in health. And I just think they're effective tools for also just building relationships between the states or private entities or hospital systems and Israeli tech, because they start to know each other, they start to exchange information, and it's just a really great way of building a larger ecosystem.
Yeah, my view is similar again to Aaron's. I think that what needs to happen with these MOUs is that they have to be very focused. We want to deploy them for very specific needs and very specific industries that are actually going to grow something or benefit both sides. I'll give you one great example, and again, we have several in New Jersey. One of them that's really interesting was actually, again, it wasn't actually a state MOU. It was through Rutgers University, which again, our largest university in New Jersey, our state university. And what Rutgers did several years ago is during a visit by Errol Margalit, who was the founder of Jerusalem Venture Partners and became a Knesset member. He came to Rutgers and understood that Rutgers has a very specific and very important food innovation program. They actually have a facility there where they help the biggest food companies package their food better, do experiments on their food. It's an incredible place. And so they signed an MOU with a very small college in northern Israel called Tel Chai, way North Israel. And these guys are actually working together. The Jewish National Fund stepped in several months ago and actually gave us a grant to one of the professors at Rutgers in this program to go spend this summer. This is deferred and will happen, I think, in the fall or winter, whenever allowed because of COVID-19. But we were actually able to get a professor some grant money to go over there and conduct research in Israel from this program at Rutgers. Again, this goes back to the point I think that Aaron and I are making, which is that we need to take these MOUs, we need to take these relationships and commercialize them. We need our industries and our states to actually fiscally benefit from the Israel relationship and create jobs. And that's exactly what these MOUs at their core really should do.
So I'd like to transition a little bit more into just our new reality. You touched about this earlier. Over the past 3 months, we've all been socially distanced, quarantined in our homes. And over the past 3 months, AIPAC Tech has been highlighting and showcasing incredible innovation that's been coming out of Israel and how those specific forms of innovation have been making positive impacts across the globe during these unfortunate times. What are certain state and local governments' response to COVID tech that's coming out of Israel? How are state and local government implementing Israeli technology to better the well-being of their own constituents?
Sure, I can kick off with this. I mean, I think in New Jersey, which is also, again, very relevant, we were, as many people on this call may know, especially those from the region, New Jersey continues to be the second hardest hit state in the U.S. from COVID-19. We have sadly, a huge amount of people who have died from this, and people who have become incredibly sick. So myself, and I think every agency of New Jersey, every office, switched gears and was trying to think, okay, what can I do right now to contribute? How can I help in our efforts to mitigate the situation and help people? So what I was doing was trying to, first of all, I had a huge amount of offers of PPE that even came from Israel. But aside from that, all these technologies, whether it's contact tracing, systems to identify people who are sick, we were even approached at one point, and I don't want to get into all the details, but we were approached by a huge corporation in Israel that was offering models, analysis, and big data systems of how to actually analyze what was going on in the state. We took a look at all these technologies, different offices in the state were analyzing them. I think where it gets complicated, and actually, it's something worth talking about perhaps in another juncture, but I'll mention here is, states have procurement processes. And I think that one of the challenges that came up through the whole COVID situation is that all these Israeli companies, they want to sell their products in America. They want to sell their products to each state. And, every state has their own procurement policies. And, we can't just, unilaterally say, hey, we're going to buy A or we're not going to buy B. And so what we were able to do is to channel a lot of this stuff through our procurement system. It was evaluated. But I think that, one of the things we did get out of this was, I remember we did a very interesting briefing with the Israel Defense Forces Homefront Command, with some of the people involved with COVID-19 policy, with the emergency response aspect. And our state Homeland Security Agency had a conference call that I have to facilitate between them to talk about best practices, to understand the impact of what was going on the ground in each place. It was a very, very productive conversation. So we continue to look in New Jersey at all these technologies from Israel. I have to say, we've got to, I think that as a lesson learned from this, we have to do either ourselves a better job of communicating with Israelis, or Israelis also have to do their own homework about, how procurement works in the U.S. Because there was just a flood of technology actually coming in. Maybe someone will invent a way. Maybe Aaron will invent it through his organization of how to actually categorize and to deploy all of these different technologies, because it came at me like a hurricane. But we definitely were interested in a lot of it, and we continue to look at different technologies from Israel that can save people's lives from COVID-19.
Yeah, I think the hurricane, as Andrew just said, I think states were overwhelmed in the procurement process, and not just related to Israel, related to local manufacturers. Everything was crazy, and the pace was insane, and just the system was overwhelmed. We did see a few Israel success stories. There's a company in Rhode Island, Diagnostic Robotics, which signed an agreement with the state to help with some sort of technology management on the health side. But I actually think from where I sit, the real successes were not in directly dealing with COVID-19. It was the byproduct. I saw a real uptick in Israeli robotic companies and unmanned vehicle companies that were starting to get more contracts. There's a company that moved its headquarters to New York called Fabric, which does automated warehouse fulfillment. So basically robots are picking stuff off the shelf and putting it into baskets that are then being dropped into boxes and sent. And the only human involved is the single person operator on the floor who's managing all the robots. And they're starting to get more contracts now. And you have a company called BW Robotics, which does UAV systems, and they started doing automated pollination in New York State and in California for farmers. So you're seeing that because of the restrictions as a result of COVID-19, I didn't see so many Israeli products getting in for many reasons, because I think just the bottleneck of the process, and also a lot of these Israeli companies don't have the proper FDA approval and NIOSH approval to get their products in the system. But you are seeing that this byproduct, I saw a tremendous growth in the unmanned space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add just one more thing, just from my perspective, because I've been dealing with this, for just like weeks and weeks. There's so much amazing tech that I saw, and I never seen it before, right? It's like all this technology came out of the woodwork during the emergency. And Aaron and I even spoke at one point during the crisis, and I recall saying that we've got to have these companies actually promoting these technologies. And our Homeland Security Director likes to, he uses the term a lot, blue sky day, right? When we're operating under normal conditions, we've got to be looking, and this is a message to anyone who's representing an Israeli tech company or people who are doing business with Israel. We've got to, as a state, I would love to see these things on a normal day. So we can actually take the time to evaluate. I can have conversations with my colleagues. When we're trying to deploy some sort of healthcare response technology, and we're actually in the middle of the emergency, that's not the right time necessarily to be doing that. The same people who are trying to deploy a technology are oftentimes the same people who are responding to the emergency itself. So I think that as we kind of get through COVID-19, we're going to have learned a lot of lessons from this. And I think there's going to be a great opportunity, especially in the healthcare space, to look at these companies and evaluate them in a more holistic way, so we can be prepared for the next emergency.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've seen also, just by virtue of just all these calls that we've been doing, so many Israeli tech companies that might have been focused on one niche, but have had to adapt given the new circumstances of this reality. And now are doing incredibly well and are actually playing such a significant role in helping constituents here in the United States to stay healthy or help out institutions like hospitals that are lacking beds or ventilators. So Israeli tech companies that are tracking all of that. So there's so much that's out there and so many different ways that we can integrate these different types of companies to help better our world and our country as a whole. So we're open now for the Q&A portion of the call. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to write into the chat box or send me an email directly at yrein@aipac.org. I'm seeing a few questions to me personally, so I'd like to just kick it off with that. First one from John Lieberman from the New York area. So earlier in the conversation, when we'd been talking about just how Israeli technology is contributing to such high levels of revenue within New York or Massachusetts or different parts of the country, John is asking, what can we do to make these numbers grow? How can we make these numbers higher? What are we lacking? What are the weak spots in terms of what we've seen over the past few years? The numbers are great, but what else can we do to make it better?
Sure, I'll jump in if that's
Right.
okay. I think the biggest weak spot from what I've seen is follow-up. I think that a lot of companies and a lot of governments get the introductions or begin to go down a certain road for an MOU, and the follow-up is just not necessarily there if you don't have someone dedicated. What New Jersey did by having someone like Andrew who's always sitting on this relationship, that is important because you have someone who could shepherd a deal through. So I think from just looking at other states out there, the biggest weakness I've seen is just the follow-up and keeping at it and making sure that A gets to Z and doesn't stop halfway through.
Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, I actually got a message about this, and yeah, I just think there needs to be a continued amount of education in Israel, and I think that look, we've just got very different business styles, between Israel and the United States. I think everybody here, is well aware of that, and I always find it fun when companies like find me and they're throwing stuff at me, but really we've got, as Aaron said. We've got a very robust procurement process in New Jersey, like most states. It frankly comes from experience, right? We need to have a system here, and so I think that one of the ways that we can we can grow opportunities is for the companies in Israel is do a little bit of homework. You've got great people like Aaron out there who run great organizations. People can contact me and I can give them some advice. But the second thing is we want to continue also to have. I think the VCs actually in the incubators are really key here. Having these companies growing these smaller Israeli companies and their technologies and giving them the advice, actually not just about how to make great technology or how to grow their company, but actually how to engage in the U.S. and how to do business here is also a key component here. When we have companies who approach us in New Jersey that are very cognizant of procurement and some how the FDA works or privacy law is extremely important here. There was COVID technology that came my way that was a definite no-go. We've got rules in the United States about privacy. We've got to respect that. So I think that before people kind of throw stuff at us here, they have to do their initial checklist in Israel to make sure that it's going to be minimally compliant to baseline standards at the state and federal level. And then we kind of go from there. And that'll weed out, I think, a lot of lost time.
So Andrew, you had mentioned earlier about, the intersection of the academic sector and the private sector. Actually, about a few months ago, my colleague Justin Goldberg and I went out to Boston and met up with a few AIPAC tech leaders in the industry that are out in Boston. And from the biggest takeaway really from the conversations that we had was just how Boston or Massachusetts just in general is this incredible intersection between private sector and the academic sector. Given MIT, Harvard, a lot of reputable institutions. I'd love to hear a little bit more about just the intersections of these various sectors. How do they play out into the ultimate growth of the Israeli-U.S. tech relationship?
Yeah, such a great question. And by the way, pardon me for making the plug that I love Boston. I go up to Massachusetts, really great people, really smart people. But in New Jersey, we of course have a very, very, very robust academic ecosystem. We've got Princeton, we've got Rutgers, we've got Stevenson, New Jersey Institute of Technology. And I'm listing them because we have some of the best research in America. So does Massachusetts, no doubt. New York also. These are states with incredible, incredible research institutions. And what comes out of research is that I've learned. Again, my background is in international affairs and political science, and but it's so obvious that the commercialization out of the research institutions is just so valuable. The intellectual property that's coming out of these universities is so important. So I've seen that, first of all, there is a hunger, contrary maybe to some issues that are out there or some belief. There's a deep hunger at major universities in New Jersey and across this country for Israeli universities to partner with them, because it's not just good for our intellectual health and the future of the world. It's just good for business. When you take a Princeton or Rutgers and look, a good example. Rutgers just invented the saliva test that's being used for COVID, right? It's being commercialized all over the place. I was on a call a few weeks ago with the Director General of Hadassah Hospital talking about that. Building relationships between the two. This is big bucks. So when you want to look at this from a purely business perspective, academic relationships ultimately translate into huge dollars or shekels in this case. And so that's incredibly important.
Aaron, what about you? What have you witnessed in New York or just across the country as well?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why the US and Israel align so well on business is that both countries take seriously the academic institutions and their role in economic development. Every major university in Israel has a commercialization arm that spins out amazing companies. I mentioned Mobileye earlier, that came from Hebrew University. You're seeing this across the US. I was at a water conference in Utah in September, and it was an Israeli water conference put on by the US Chamber of Commerce. And everyone who was speaking there were professors from Utah State, from BYU. And there's a real understanding that a lot of these game-changing technologies are coming from universities, university research, university collaboration. So I think that Israel and the US are very aligned on that. And that, we mentioned the MOUs before. That's why a lot of these are happening through the universities. Like the one in Pennsylvania is happening through Thomas Jefferson University. And it's just a really good mechanism to accelerate growth and to bring really sharp minds together.
So pie in the sky, last question before we get to our poll results and to sort of see where that's at, and love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Where do you see the future of the US-Israel tech relationship going? What are some bold predictions on both of your ends for Israeli technology in the United States over the next coming months?
I'm going to give you my prediction. My prediction is that COVID-19 continues to drive, there's two factors. COVID-19 continues to drive Israeli innovators out of the major cities, particularly New York. Sorry, Aaron, my prediction. Driving them out of the cities, like a lot of people. In addition to the fact that I've already seen Israeli tech starting to migrate and grow, right? They're growing out of Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley. Israelis who came over years ago to start their companies or grow their companies here, they're getting bigger, they're having families, they're looking to go out into suburbia, out into the sort of on the outlying regions around our big cities. So I think states like, California and New Jersey, Pennsylvania have huge opportunity here. So I think my prediction is you're going to see Israeli tech increasing in some of these areas that maybe were secondary are going to become more primary because the landscape is changing.
Yeah, I think I think the way the tech relationship is going is the way the overall tech priorities are going. I think you're going to see Israeli companies that are working in cyber, that are working in clean tech, that are working in UA, unmanned aerial vehicles. Um, Agriculture is always big. I think these are going to continue, big data. I think these are going to continue to play very big roles in the future. What I don't want to predict and would be very interested to see is how the economic impact of COVID-19 is going to have on financing these Israeli companies to get to the place where they need to be. So I'm interested to see where that goes. And if you can predict that, then maybe we have a new company.
Exactly. Well, we'll see where the coming months will take us. Hopefully for the better, given everything that's been going on with COVID. Hopefully we'll see some really positive things coming out of all of this. So I'm actually going to end the polling right now and share the results. So majority of the people that were on this call believe that the digital healthcare industry will benefit most from the deepening of the U.S.-Israel tech cooperation, something that I'm not personally surprised. Seems like the audience has been traditionally very much focused around digital health for the past few calls that we've been doing. But just would love to hear your thoughts before we just wrap up.
Oh, Aaron?
Well, digital health is, there's definitely a lot happening there, a lot of investment. Israel is excellent at it. The statistics are off the charts for the percentage of Israeli startups that are digital. There's great statistics out there about the percentage of the overall patents in medical that come out of Israel. I think that what we're seeing now in this frantic time we're living in is we're going to see an acceleration into some of these technologies, sometimes we need to adopt new technology because of what's happening right now. And so that's creating a real opportunity for Israeli technology. So it makes a lot of sense to me.
How about you, Andrew?
Yeah. My hot take on this is that, I'm going to group digital health and med tech together. And then number 2, cyber, no surprise. I'm under New Jersey Department of State. We're in charge of all the elections of New Jersey. And, we've got a huge amount of security issues internationally. I'm sure another AIPAC forum, you'll talk about, Iran, China, and Russia. And, we are definitely under threat from cyber attack. We deal with it all the time, in states with big infrastructure. So I think that, don't count out cybersecurity as, Israel's leading in that. And we are seeing, I've been continuing to see a huge amount of interest in Israeli cyber, in my state. And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of interest in that as the security needs continue to demand it.
Oh yeah, cyber is huge. And as we continue to do remote work, that's something that just seems so tangible for everyone to really use and integrate more cybersecurity within their remote work systems or within just sort of their daily lives as well.